All right, everybody, you've heard the news. Let's get down to brass tacks. I don't know why I used that phrase. I've probably never used that phrase in my entire life before, and yet it just occurred to me like something bizarre and unexpected materializing out of the ether. Brass tacks. Anyway, I don't know what your first reaction was when you heard this news. It broke rather late last night, and of course, I was still glued to Twitter with my eyes glazing over, and therefore saw it pretty immediately. But my first reaction was, oh, gee, I wonder how many conspiracy theories we can come up with, and I wonder what the wildest conspiracy theory is that people could come up with. And the floodgates are open in that respect. Now, I'm not endorsing any of these theories, but there are several. And this is really only a matter of fun and amusement because the most probable explanation for Trump testing positive for COVID is that he hasn't implemented the personal precautions necessary to avoid contracting COVID. And therefore he caught it from Hope Hicks or somebody else, probably Hope Hicks, but who knows exactly. But that's sort of boring and bland. So let's go through the potential conspiratorial explanations. Number one is that Trump purposefully contracted COVID. Now, again, I'm not endorsing any of these theories, but I think they're sort of amusing to hash out, and crazier things have happened. Trump purposefully contracted COVID because he thought, hey, my standing in the polls is flagging. Looks like Arizona is not going in my direction. Gee whiz, that debate this week. I don't know. Maybe it didn't do me any favors. And I want an excuse to bow out early of the election, something I frankly always thought was at least a remote possibility, in that Trump couldn't, for the purposes of his own ego, ever accept that he was just rejected electorally. So here comes, about a month before the election, a perfect excuse to simply get out for health reasons. And then Trump will go down in history as having never technically lost an election, although people will argue over whether he lost, in some sense, the 2020 election. Now, I don't think that's a likely conspiracy, but I'm saying it's one conspiracy that you might bandy about. Another conspiracy is that Trump announced that he has COVID, but doesn't actually have it because he thinks that triumphing over the disease, and let's be honest, if he does have it, although he has a few risk features, meaning he's in a number of categories that would be relatively high risk for having a severe outcome in relation to COVID, meaning he's 74 years old, he's obese, he's a male. But all that notwithstanding, it's reasonably likely, if you look at the data, that he will not experience a fatal outcome from COVID and will probably recover. And so maybe he caught it purposely to have that result, and then he can have this triumph. And maybe it'll be a last-ditch effort to boost his poll numbers because, it's morning in America. We can get over the pandemic. Just look at me. I did it. I'm so strong. Or maybe he didn't actually get it, but he can go through the motions of staging this recovery. Again, to repeat, I don't think any of these conspiratorial explanations are likely, but I mean, what else are we going to do? We're all sitting around speculating about this, so it's fun to engage in some aimless and probably irresponsible speculation. Now, what are the anti-Trump conspiracy explanations? Was he purposefully infected? Did somebody sneak close to him at his fundraiser in New Jersey this week and cough or decline to wear a mask because they knew that they were infected and they were sent in by, I don't know, George Soros or Kamala Harris to infect Trump and then show to the American public how reckless Trump has been in dealing with the virus, to the extent that even has Hope Hicks, his communications director. I think that's her role. She has some staff role in the White House. I'm not sure if that's her exact role at this point. I actually don't think it is. That was her past role that she resigned from. But she's somebody who has had, been with Trump even when he was a private citizen with the Trump organization, handled his personal affairs. Maybe she's a sleeper agent. Whoa. Maybe, I don't know, China or Russia or Iran or Venezuela has co-opted Hope Hicks, convinced her that, look, Hope, you're like 29 years old. It's okay if you contract the coronavirus. You'll recover. You'll survive. But what you got to do, or else we'll release whatever blackmail info we have on you, is you have to infect the President of the United States. This fall, the October surprise, Hope Hicks has been dispatched by one of America's greatest enemies to infect with COVID Donald J. Trump. Blah! I don't think any of that is likely, but got to maintain a little bit of levity. And probably the only real reason why Trump contracted COVID is because he decided not to social distance at a fundraiser or on his plane or at some event. Got a little bit loose, a little bit casual. And the question now is, how will this affect the campaign? I don't know that anybody has a firm answer. Trump was on a very dubious trajectory already. If you followed any of my commentary or tweets or writings, I never thought that Trump was in a particularly good position, even pre-COVID, even prior to March of this month, because he had not marshaled the ordinary advantages of incumbency. And you could get into the reasons for that, partly to do with his own incompetence and lack of political acumen in terms of governance. He's a great campaigner, as was demonstrated by his astounding victory in 2016. But in terms of governance, it's a different can of worms. You need to do things necessary to expand your coalition as a incumbent president, and it's not clear that that happened, and that was evident in the data going back years. Clearly, it's more complicated to do if you're arrayed against a media complex and an opposition party which has declared you to be a fascist dictator who was illegitimately installed into office by a hostile foreign power. So that's all true, but nonetheless, it has created a set of conditions where it was never clear to me that Trump was as well positioned as a lot of his supporters, and frankly, even some leftists who were saying, oh my God, we can't nominate Joe Biden because he will get swamped by Trump. And if you want to pretend now that you weren't one of the people claiming with total certainty, total unearned certitude back in, I don't know, January, February, that Joe Biden, if nominated, he would get destroyed by Trump, Ben Shapiro style, then I don't believe you. And I could go dig up the tweets. I could go dig up the podcast snippets. I could go dig up the videos and the articles if I really wanted to. But you all know that that was the general tone as to the projections of Joe Biden's chances against Trump in an earlier portion of the year. And I never felt that was the case. I thought that Trump would probably be the disadvantaged party against virtually any Democratic candidate. Yes, including Bernie. The one exception that I thought in regard to that was maybe Mayor Pete, although maybe he could have won. Hard to imagine him winning against Elizabeth Warren. But then again, who knows when you have a great urban economy and you have all the old people who have moved away from Trump in significant numbers in terms of his 2016 margins, meaning voters age 65 and over. Then you have all them, not all of them, but many of them annoyed that the virus has yet to be contained, and they are at obviously the most risk due to their age. So in terms of the trajectory of the campaign, it seems like the trajectory has been pretty clear. We don't have the volatility in 2020 as we did in 2016, which created a window of opportunity for Trump to achieve what Steve Bannon referred to in hindsight about 2016 as a royal flush. I think that's what he called it, meaning he got dealt an incredible hand and was therefore able to squeak through with a relatively narrow electoral college victory. And it never seemed to me that like the conditions of 2016 were operative in 2020. Trump's campaign messaging, I don't think is anywhere near as effective in 2020 as it was in 2016. It's heavily ideologized, meaning he's ranting about the so-called radical left, claiming that Biden is nothing more than a Trojan horse for the radical left. Has the Democratic Party coalition moved marginally to the, quote, left over the past 4 years? It's arguable. But in any case, the accusation doesn't land on Biden with anywhere near the salience that the accusations leveled by Trump against Hillary Clinton in 2016 landed. That's my impression. Because as I've said over and over again, what did Trump do in 2016 that was so successful? Well, first, he dispatched the reigning dynasty in the Republican Party, the Bushes, and then he went up against the reigning dynasty in the Democratic Party, the Clintons. And it wasn't that hard to peg Hillary Clinton as the emblem of a failed and decrepit establishment that would just perpetuate the status quo. Whereas with Trump, I mean, we now have 4 years of a, quote, status quo to look out upon and judge. And would he have to have always changed his campaign tack to some degree? Yeah, but when you listen to Trump, listen to him at the debate, listen to the Republican Party messaging, a lot of the attacks against Biden are pretty much just standard fare Republican stuff. Whereas when 2016, Trump's messaging was unique and novel. And that's why you saw parts of the country that few had anticipated could gravitate to Trump, like rural Maine, like parts of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. We know the states that gave Trump a victory in 2016. My intuition, and I'll try to substantiate this when I leave for my in-person, socially distanced and masked. Yeah, I don't care if you make fun of me for wearing a mask. You ought to wear one if you are in a public space that is crowded. It's not that complicated. It's a simple public health adjustment. And I just don't buy this hysteria that's mostly from the right, which says that if you wear a mask, you are muzzling yourself. You are just showing how much of a sheep you are and how compliant you are. Well, no, I'm not. I don't feel that I'm compelled to wear the mask, but at the same time, I'm not like a psychopath, and I can compartmentalize about what is personally prudent for me to do. And wearing a mask is not that of a burden. And if you have invested so much emotional stake into the wearing or not of a mask, then I sort of question your sanity. And I'm sure I'll get tons of comments in the chat and elsewhere about how deluded I am. Well, I don't think so. I think making very trivial modifications to one's daily life in relation to a once in a lifetime pandemic is not a huge ask. And in fact, if Trump loses, I think you'll be able to attribute that, at least to a large degree, to the fact that people don't like living in a pandemic. They expect at least a reasonably competent response from the federal government to curtail the pandemic. And when that hasn't happened, they blame the incumbent. So the Trump supporters or whomever ridiculing mask wearing could be in a position to reevaluate if the pendulum swings in the direction that it appears to be swinging. Anyway, the heavily ideologized attacks on Biden don't strike me as anywhere near as potent as the 2016 messaging. If you'll notice, Steve Bannon is nowhere in sight, at least in an official capacity, fashioning the messaging for the 2020 campaign. Yeah, he was just arrested on a boat not long ago for some scheme for crowdfunding for a fake wall on the southern border. So he's probably preoccupied. And so, that was always my sense in terms of where the direction is going. It's never been popular on social media to say anything pro Biden, not in the normative sense, in that I want Joe Biden to succeed, or I'm in favor of Joe Biden on some substantive level. But in terms of his electoral prospects, that's never been a popular thing to say on social media because nobody really cares that much about Joe Biden. There is a genuine thing about a lack of enthusiasm that is pro Biden per se, but it doesn't really matter because the electorate is so consumed by enthusiasm regardless that Joe Biden doesn't need to do much aside from being the guy that you need to vote for if you want Trump out. Sorry. So that's the status now. I guess Trump has canceled his in-person campaign events for the foreseeable future. Foreseeable, you would think, at least within 2 weeks, which is the standard time that you're supposed to quarantine and self-isolate if you test positive. I wouldn't be shocked if we get another round of surprises. It's only October 2nd. Whether it's related to the coronavirus and Trump or other things. But we will have to see. This is going to be the crazy. October is always the craziest month in an election year. So prepare yourselves for a onslaught of insanity, even if the outcome appears to look clearer and clearer, which is a significant Biden victory. But then again, I'm not saying with absolute. So if somebody wants to come back in a month from now and Trump somehow wins, I'm not saying that Trump is going to lose. I don't play these prediction games that you see a lot of pundits play, where they make false predictions and then they just forge ahead and never have to account for their false predictions because they can just make additional predictions, and it just keeps going and going and going. It's so annoying and tedious. But one variable is definitely that we've transitioned to a wildly different system of election administration in a lot of the country. So that's something to bear in mind and should lessen the certainty about Trump's demise, because who knows how that's going to actually work. The question is, will the margin of victory for Biden be big enough that it won't come down to any kind of legal wrangling over the validity of ballots in Pennsylvania or whatnot. So there you have it. A couple of super chats here. Marcus says Johnson, Bolsonaro, now Trump, maybe Modi next. Well, I mean, Boris Johnson had a really bad case of the coronavirus. He was hospitalized, immobilized, and I've read some reports that he just, according to people who know him and are in his circle, he just seems like he's lost a step somewhat since he first had it in March or April. Even though he's recovered, he's not currently suffering from the virus. But we don't know. We don't have the full data about the long-term impacts of people who especially have severe cases of the virus. So remains to be seen how it will affect Trump. I think it's probably likely they'll have a relatively mild case and recover in about 2 weeks. But then again, don't know. He is in a few high-risk categories. That all being said, it's notable, to say the least, that the paramount issue, and I just tweeted this before I started the stream, but come on, it's true. Don't even try to deny it. The paramount issue in the 2020 presidential election, as of today, October 2nd, 2020, is whether two men in their mid to late 70s can even physically last another month. So this is why I constantly go back to this theme of imperial decline or hegemonic erosion of the United States, because, I mean, look at what we're dealing with here. It's a late-stage Soviet gerontocracy. Obviously, the system of government is dissimilar from the Soviet Union, but you gotta ask yourself how we come to a situation like this, where Joe Biden barely can make it through a debate. I don't think he was senile in the debate this week, but he was actually worse than I thought he would be. I mean, I thought that they would inject him with one of these amphetamine vitamin combo serums, and he would turn in a performance reminiscent of that final debate he had with Bernie during the primaries, or some other instances when he seems to be more on his foot. But he was just pretty bad at this debate, just in terms of exhibiting vigor. So we all have to wait. Everybody waited with bated breath this morning and afternoon to see if Joe Biden's test would come back positive or negative, because he took one after he had been, potentially exposed to the virus by Trump or whomever else he might have had come in contact with at the debate. Biden's negative. I don't see why not that the Biden campaign doesn't just throw him in a cryogenic chamber and seal it for the next month. That would be my advice. Nobody needs to hear anything really more from Joe, I wouldn't think. But this is something. This set of circumstances is very much a sign of decline, and that's a theme that I keep harping on, because it's sort of grounding to not be so tethered to just the day-to-day nuttiness. You lose sight of some of the broader trends, which seem to be guiding on a more fundamental level these developments. Okay, people, that's my dandy little update. Stay safe, stay cool. I'm not going to say wear a mask, because if you were inclined to wear a mask, you would be wearing them by now. I can't convince you. But, my best wishes to our beloved President Donald J. Trump, and also Melania.